What about like experience itself of a three-dimensional world when phenomenons and the way you encounter the other person is actually fully present, fully talking to you in terms of the difference between how media became kind of framed the reality, including the alter our sense of space and time, and to large degree who this other person is. So though in a lots of sense we are closer to, on a global scale, how much we know about the other, but in the other hand, there is very easy to know much less and to frame this other and label that other person as this other, watching the suffering of this other, watching the difference of this other. There is so much that the essence, that through that framing that gets lost in the experience of environment, including the other human being.
Actually, we haven't yet mentioned the term virtual reality, which is an escape from the other, from the real world, from human suffering. It's basically taking us into a completely constructed space, a cyber space that is an otherness to our bodies and social and natural environments. So this is, to me, the major event of technology that is creating these virtual worlds that's taking us from concrete relations to others, although it's reconstructing technologically mediated relations. Even, I guess you can, through Google Maps, go to any part of the world. So nature, Paris, or any city can, literally everything from sex to the great artworks can be accessible through this virtual reality, this technologically mediated world. So I'm glad you raised this question, and I'll give up to my other panelists. But to me, it seems like it's time for a return to existentialism and phenomenology that involve self-other relations, Mitsein, our social relations, communities to nature, etc.
You mean like being where? Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, if we think of the kind of origins of new media technology, right, it had to do with communication. And I think as long as we're somehow packaging the other, that makes it really difficult to communicate effectively back and forth. And so I think much of the problem, I mean, I think there's a tendency, I do it all the time, I think there's a tendency to want to say, oh, it's technology's fault. It's causal. And it is, to some extent. There's no doubt. I mean, and especially, once again, if we take it as kind of originary, then we're going to be considering it just as such. But the problem becomes how it is that we then two-dimensionally package these folks or package the other. And to me, this becomes a kind of political problem in a way. I think it's as much a political problem, and I mean this in the sense of the polis, not in any real existing politics, that there really is no impetus whatsoever to utilize these tools or I should better say, to occupy the space provided by these material practices in any way other than a kind of framing that we're very used to. I mean, there's a lot of talk about groundbreaking, and I think virtual reality is kind of an example because the realities it sets up, to use a kind of Baudrillard model, are simulations of realities that we've dealt with before. It's subduction, as he claims, rather than seduction. That's the allure of the internet sex, for example. And so I think, and I get most frustrated when we start thinking about how it is that the potential of these media forms. I mean, Hans Magnus Enzensberger spoke for years about the possibilities of bilateral communication in television. We have that. And so what do we do with it? That I think is the key question. I mean, we could, for example, I was just musing through Rousseau today and thinking of the idea of the Rousseauian state and realizing it through new media, through digital media, the idea of a direct democracy, which we utterly have within our potential yet. We're still going to toy around with the Electoral College in 2 weeks. The idea of a general will, a kind of consensus. the idea of the throw of the voice. Well, the throw of the voice, as you point out, is global, but simultaneously it's limited by other voices which can be heard coming back. And so to me, the political dimension becomes a concern.
I think that, first of all, in the virtual, you also have the virtual of possibility, so the philosophical virtual that you can think about. But I always go back to my own culture heroes here. And, you have somebody, you mentioned going back to existentialism perhaps, and I happen just to teach a course on existentialism, and so I'm not sure I'd want to go back to that, but it's you mentioned phenomenology, and it's interesting because it was a word that was banned, and that is really coming back. A lot of people are coming back to it, and I think a lot of us wonder now the shine has sort of worn off some of the new media, and people say, well, what new media anyhow? What is so new about new media? That we start to ask ourselves questions, including, I don't know if you saw that article by Sherry Turkle, who is a media specialist from MIT, and she had a good article in the Times about how we constantly are on our little machines and our devices, and we never see each other. And that is actually a problem. And I mean, it's a problem, sure. And pretty soon you never talk to each other. And it's in Up in the Air, there was this funny scene that you remember when the couple wants to spend a romantic night and they're both behind the computer. I thought it was terrific. But so what do you do? I mean, philosophically, nothing prevents you from using technologies in a moderate way. I mean, it's wonderful to have a cell phone that can reach people. It's wonderful to have all these devices, but you don't have to be on it 24/7 or have it on every time or interrupt the conversation. Excuse me, let me check my phone here. And, it's very rude to begin with to be sitting with somebody. I mean, my students come to my office hour and they take a, excuse me, and they're sitting in front of me and take their devices. So
they just do without even breaking it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just part of them. And do we really want that? So do we really want some kind of an experience that still has to do with the world, with the elements? Do we want an experience that has to do with face-to-face, with the art of conversation? And to date, if computers are difficult to understand, they're not as complicated as a human conversation, because you have all the vibrations, you have all the nuances in a conversation that you cannot get when you're texting. So there is a case to be made, but I think they should be able to coexist. Perhaps they should, instead of replacing one totally with the other, they should be able to coexist. And that little book that Guattari wrote on the 3 ecologies is really a gem. And though the world has, alas, gotten even more complicated since that was written, I think you still can go back to it. And there is a hint in there at using existential terms, such as the subject for itself, or, the open, the subject. He makes a plea for a return to the subject that he sees as having disappeared under the influx of media, and a type of media that you get with propaganda, for example, and with heavy advertisement. And he really makes a plea to get away from that and to come back to have a sort of critical edge, to develop a critical edge and some kind of a critical insight, but also to open yourself to develop a subject that would be open both on the inside and the outside, and that recognizes its fragility, and that therefore can enter into connection with the world. That would use technologies in order to overcome a lot of the problems that we have in the environment. I'm a little skeptical about that, but nonetheless, I think there is this very strong desire to go back to something, what you call human, to the humanity that everyone feels that it is somehow we're going down a path that we not necessarily want to go down.